being an artist is, having a strong sense of who you are as a human being and then wanting to share that perspective with the world.
Hello, print friends, and welcome to Season 4. I'm your host, Miranda Metcalf. Each week, I chat with artists who use print-based media to do something beyond the expected. This is a bilingual podcast, so if you subscribe, you'll be getting episodes in English, as well as Spanish with Ronaldo Gil Zambrano. Together, we speak to printmakers around the globe about their practice and passions in the world of printmaking. Hello Print Friend is brought to you by Speedball Art Products, who've been offering a diverse range of high-quality products to your practice since 1997. Products like their new line of professional relief inks, beginning with the flagship color Super Graphic Black, developed with artist-printer Bill Fick. Formulated with all the working properties artists demand, these light, fast inks roll out consistently, transfer beautifully, and clean up easily with soap and water. So if you want to take your practice to the next level, head on over to Speedball's website to see where you can pick up a can of your new favorite color. There's a link in the show notes. My guest this week is Junli Song, a winner of the 2022 5x5 exhibition. This juried exhibition takes place during Print Austin, a spectacular month-long festival which includes 60 print-focused events, serving thousands of audience members annually. The exhibition features 5 artists and will hang at iVester Contemporary in Austin for an in-person show from December 11th, 2021 through January 22nd, 2022. Online programming is going on now for 5x5, so make sure you check out Print Austin's Instagram for details. In this episode, Junli and I talk about her long and winding road through economics and children's book illustrations before finding printmaking, the fantastical forms that show up in her work, and how one's life can be a series of catastrophes and still turn out quite all right. So, without further ado, sit back, relax, and prepare to take the scenic route with Junli Song. Hi, Junli. How's it going?
Hi, Miranda. I'm good. How are you?
I'm really good. Thank you for joining me again.
It's my pleasure.
So this is, only the second precedent ever in Hello Print Friend history of having to re-record due to technical difficulties, which, I think 130 episodes in, that's not so bad.
Not at all. And I'm sure in the era of quarantine, everyone's had a lot of technical difficulties, and we all know where you're coming from.
Totally. So I'm really grateful that you're willing to come on and do it again, and also really excited to talk to you again, with more context and to share your story, because I already know it's a great one. Yeah. Spoiler alert. So before we dive in to these questions in our conversation, would you please introduce yourself and let people know who you are, where you are, and what you do?
Absolutely, Miranda. So I'm Junli. Also, Happy New Year to everyone, since this is being released today, apparently.
Yes.
And so I'm an artist. I'm also currently an MFA student at the University of Arkansas. So I'm based in Fayetteville. I'm exactly halfway through my degree at this point. As for what I do, I usually describe my work as being largely about storytelling and world building. I would say I entered this program largely as only a printmaker, but now I've been exploring a lot of different media. So in addition to printmaking, I've been working in a lot of ceramics. And I've also started dabbling a bit in animation. So I think because my work is so much about world building, I'm very interested in thinking about how I can make work that starts to enter into other dimensions beyond the flat picture. So yeah, starting to think about space and time and what that can bring to my work.
Wonderful. And then where did you grow up, and what role did art play in that part of your life?
Oh yeah, I remember this question.
Yeah.
So I'm originally from Chicago. I was very randomly born in Berlin, but sadly I don't have citizenship because of Germany.
Yeah, all that free education
Oh
is,
my
I feel
gosh,
like,
I
would be a
know.
dream for you.
I would love to go there, but yeah, they're not letting me in. Anyway, I grew up in Chicago. I was very fortunate because my parents really loved art, and my stepdad in particular loves art. So I had these amazing bookshelves just filled with huge, beautiful art books. So I remember from the time I was really little, and the books were probably half my size, just being able to sit around and leaf through all of this wonderful artwork. And then, of course, there are also amazing museums in Chicago. So, I also have wonderful memories of going there regularly especially with my mom, and walking around and seeing all this amazing work. So I was very, very lucky and blessed to, have grown up that way. And so art has always been a huge part of my life. And luckily now I'm also pursuing it professionally.
Yeah. And yet art and art making, at least academically speaking, came to you a little bit later because you started out economics, international development. Tell me sort of about coming to that decision to study those works and that journey from the University of Chicago economics department, which sounds incredibly prestigious, I'm sure it is, and then eventually shifting into making in the artistic sense.
Yeah, I think one good thing about re-recording this is I've had some more time to mull over it. I think last time I rambled for half an hour about how this happened. I think that, it's kind of crazy how we expect people to know what they want to do from such a young age. I know we talked about that last time as well. And some people do quite early on, but I definitely didn't. So yeah, when I started my undergrad, I tried so many different areas. And I'm also just naturally a very curious person, and I love learning. So I'm very easily drawn into various fields of study. So, I did some history and then psychology and literature, and I was taking French. And so I kind of wanted to do it all, and I couldn't decide. So about halfway through my BA, my parents sat me down, and they staged a bit of an intervention with me, and they told me that, look, since you are not quite sure what to study, you're going to study economics because you're at the University of Chicago. It's what it's known for, and it's definitely something that obviously you can be employed having. And so, I had a little cry session, but ultimately I agreed because they were right. I didn't know that I had to pursue art or I had to pursue some other field. I didn't have that certainty. And so I was scared too. It's such a crazy thing, as I was saying, for you to be 18, 19, 20, even now. I think it's so crazy to just know what you want and go for it.
I mean, even at 37, I'll be like up late at night and being like, I should really just live in a van, like have those
I have nomadic
thoughts.
Daydreams all the time.
All the time, right?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of crazy because this is such a detour. But my dad just retired, and he's like departing on this crazy nomadic life, which I think is so beautiful and exciting. And also goes to show that, no matter what age you are, you can always do that. You can always decide to take off. And so I don't know. I'm very excited for him and to join him hopefully in part of the journey.
Absolutely. That sounds wonderful. Yeah. Yeah. I love hearing stories like that because
right?
I think we are, you and I are both people who are very curious and get really excited by the new.
Yeah.
And so when you hear stories about people switching careers at 50 or going and doing something nomadic after retirement, it really does fill my heart because I think I never have to be settled. I can always be changing. Yeah.
I totally agree. And I think, we live in this society that puts so much value on youth. And there's this idea that your life stops, after you're, I don't know, 40 or something like that.
Yeah.
And then you have to resign yourself to just whatever you've done so far. And so even if you've loved that, I think everyone wants to keep evolving and changing and trying new things. So it's always inspiring to see those examples and realize that, no, you can always still be brave. You can always still go into a new adventure, and it's never too late.
Yeah, I was thinking just yesterday what a horrendous phrase "the wrong side of 40" is.
Oh,
I don't even know why, but it's just so insulting, and yet, when I was younger and I was kind of at my peak of societal capital, in terms of the way I'm perceived is like as value is like, oh, it's a pretty young blonde lady. Emotionally and spiritually, I was probably the most bankrupt, and as I evolve and like lose capital in that sense, I just gain so much more in where it matters. And that's, a cheesy phrase about like your internal world, but it's true, it's true. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think there's so much, I don't know, I guess confidence or just being, starting to learn who you are. And that feels really amazing. I think when you're, flailing around trying to define yourself, even though we continue doing that, but I think just having a better sense of who that is just is a wonderful way to move around the world and to have a better idea of who you are within that world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if I want to use the word flailing to describe what you were after. I don't know that you could say international development at the University of Oxford is flailing.
Well, it felt like it. What word did I use last time? I think life crises, right?
Yeah, a series of crises.
A series of life crises. But I think we talked about this before too, which is that we're all trying to write our own stories, and that what felt like life crises, just one after another for me. Looking back, I realized, oh no, these are all just steps in my story, and they're just different stages in my story. So we completely detoured, but yes. So I studied international development. Just because I knew that with my econ degree, I was the weirdo in my classes because I definitely did not want to go into finance. I did not want to go into iBaking or hedge fund management. A lot of my classmates just, there were a few who wanted to go into pure academia and they were actually passionate about econ, but most people just wanted to make a ton of money.
Yeah.
And I was just not interested in that. And I was, from a young age, I didn't know what it meant, but I wanted my life to have meaning. I wanted to do something that was valuable to me as a human being and not just having a big house and a fancy car and things like that. So I actually had a gap year where I lived in Korea and just thought a lot about my life. And so, I ended up going on to study this development degree at Oxford. But, I think it was part of my trying many paths in order to find the right one. And so that degree actually led me to dipping my toes a bit in anthropology, which I really loved, and which really showed me the power of storytelling. And so that actually planted the seed then for me to start thinking about, how do I tell stories then with artwork? And so the most logical thing I came up with was that I could illustrate books. And so there was a little segue in Italy where I did some more soul searching after my Oxford studies. But, I ultimately ended up going back to England because I found this MA program in children's book illustration. And so that was wonderful for me. I mean, it's the first time I was properly studying art, even if it's illustration. And I know we'll get into this, but there's always that weird boundary between illustration and fine.
Right, yeah.
But I'm so grateful for that course. I learned so much. It was wonderful to finally be studying something that I was passionate about. And it's also what led me to printmaking completely by accident and by chance. And so, and then it's, going into printmaking, I mean, that's led me to where I am today, and so even though printmaking is still the main part of my practice, it's also broadened a lot since then. So it feels like, life has been slowly but surely leading me along this path to being an artist and to trying to be brave and to enter this career, because I do think, being creative professionally is so hard. And I honestly think that if I could be happy doing something else, I probably would. Because I think it's so so difficult, it's so risky, it's terrifying. But apparently I can't do anything else. So
yeah, it's really funny. I've heard artists say that before, or just kind of like, but this is the only thing I'm good at. Like if I could, go install electrics in camper vans, I would, and I'd be if I could be fulfilled doing that, I would love that. But yeah, a lot of people are like, this is the only way I know how to live. And so we're here, and we're in this place where we're putting creative outputs into the world and having to do a lot of internal wrestling to find out what that has to look like and what that's going to be. And then basically sharing it with everyone else and asking them to judge it. Like, what a terrible idea.
Oh my gosh, yes. I think there are so many moments for all creative people where you think, what was I thinking? So crazy. And this is so hard and painful.
Yeah. I'm curious, can you speak to a little bit the actual training you get in a children's book illustration masters? Yeah. I mean, are they telling you how to draw foxes with hands, or are they telling you about creating narratives, or how the images interact with the words? What does that look like?
That's actually a great question. I think a lot of people assume that you get trained in, Photoshop and things like that, but not at all. So, and of course, I'm only speaking to my degree, and it might be totally different somewhere else. I think that's true with any field of study. But yeah, I studied at Cambridge School of Art. And so the main focus was actually on the last thing you said, which was how do you work with both words and images? Also, wordless books. So essentially, how do you tell stories through imagery? So there's almost no technical training in the sense of how to draw and things like that. Because it is a master's, they assume that you already know those things. Even though, of course, not everyone's coming in with, background in art.
Some people are coming from international development, for example.
Just for example. But, fortunately, I have been drawing and painting all my life. So that area I was kind of okay with. But, they really throw you in, and there was a lot of making dummy books, so mock-ups. There's a lot of, I think, learning how to work within the constraints of traditional publishing. So your typical picture book, which is 12 spreads. There's a lot of, thinking, how do you, work within such a short space? And also if you're using words, how do you still tell a compelling story when it's so incredibly sparse, and so pared back, how can you still bring readers along on a journey? And of course, then there's also all of the practical sides of, what's your audience? Which of course we think about in all fields of art, right? But specifically in that course, you're thinking of a very young audience usually. But a lot of us also wanted to make things that would still be interesting for their parents, or for adults.
Yeah, well, I feel like some of the most beautiful books are children's books.
Oh, yeah.
And maybe because of that simplicity that you're talking about. And of course, I still get really moved by book illustration. My brother and sister-in-law have an incredible 3-year-old who, because she's my niece, I happen to believe is the cutest, smartest, blah, blah. Yeah, right. She's the best. She's the best baby. Right. And seeing her read the children's books that I grew up with and being introduced to those illustrations, as someone who's now made a career in the arts, I have been delighted and surprised by how incredible that art is. Because you don't think about it as a little tiny human, but now seeing it as someone who's made a living in this field, it's remarkable the kind of art that ends up in children's books.
I agree. There are some absolute treasures. And, when I moved here, I think I only allowed myself one box of books, which is incredibly hard for me because I love books. But at least half of them were just picture books. There are some absolute gems, and I still return to them all the time. I find them so inspiring. And some of them are also, beautiful and profound. And it's amazing how deep some of these books are.
Yeah.
When we have maybe 8 words on a page, and it's just, it blows me away. And I think also, that course made me think a lot about just the book itself as a medium and how we can utilize the turn of the page and also just the format of the page itself. It's really powerful. So I don't know. I mean, I haven't made a book in quite a while, but I still think about it a lot. And
well, and what an interesting training to receive as someone who then goes on and steps into the fine art world. And again, every time I say fine art, that is with inverted commas, because it's very loaded and judgmental and, has a lot of things. But for lack of a better word, the fine art world, going from that does sound like a kind of really sort of nuts and bolts training in visual communication that you don't really get in MFA programs, but probably would be quite useful going into one.
I mean, I hope so. I hope so, because I am trying to tell stories with my work. So I'm still very much trying to figure out what that looks like, what forms that takes. And, recently I think I've started playing around a bit with abstraction, which is very strange territory for me. So I'm not totally sure what's happening right now in my own work. But at least, a few months ago, I was pretty sure that I was still telling stories in a more conventional sense.
Well, I think that's where you should be when you're halfway through your graduate degree. At least in the ideal world, it's because you are being challenged, and so you are saying, "Oh gosh, what am I making?" I think that's a good sign.
There's
a good sign.
People.
Yeah. So you said that it was through your MA in children's book illustration that you discovered printmaking, you came to printmaking. How did that happen?
Yeah, well, so about halfway through, see, the halfway point is something, I think, something momentous always happens around.
It's a good time for a crisis,
a series of crises. So about halfway through, I was having a crisis.
Yep,
and so I had always been, working in a very traditional way. So I did a lot of oil painting through high school. And then, I loved charcoal drawing and pencil drawing. Well, no, actually, that's not totally true. I'm very impatient, so I get drawing. But I still like it. But I'm one of those people who loses a lot of patience when I have to fill in everything with a pencil. It's like, why? Why would I ever do this?
It's so small. Why is it so small?
Oh my gosh, I know. It's like, whereas charcoal, you can just smudge it all over the place. And also soft pastels I love. And so I spent my first year mainly working in those media. I think the problem for me was that, I had trouble finding, some people call it a style. Our professors like calling it a visual language. I had a lot of trouble making my own voice heard, I guess, through my work. And so everything felt very traditional, and that's fine. I still love traditional artwork too. But, it didn't feel like me yet. And so I couldn't figure out how to bridge that gap. And the funny thing is, now my work is very graphic. I have a lot of flat shapes and flat areas of color. But at that time I thought, oh no, I'll never make work that's very big. But, because I was having this crisis, I had one of my best friends who just kept telling me, I think you should try printmaking. I think you should try printmaking. And initially I kept telling her, no, no, no. And a large part of my hesitance was also that printmaking is so technical, and I get very daunted and intimidated.
Well, and if you like instant gratification, printmaking's not the
Yes.
best medium for that.
Absolutely. And it's not like we were given courses in printmaking either. So I think the wonder of taking a class is you have someone to hold your hand and do it, right? But we had, a half-hour demo on monoprint, a half-hour demo on a relief print. It was, I think, 1 hour for screen print because we had this amazing tech, John, and he did show us like cleaning and also then printing. So, it obviously has to take longer for screen print and coding the screen. I was very scared and hesitant. But because I was having such a hard time, I thought, you know what? I'm okay. Why not? Let me just try this. And what's the most I lose? Like a couple of days, right? I went in, and I mean, it's quite lucky. I think my first time trying out screen printing, it went smoothly. And so as I quickly learned once I decided to commit to it, oh my gosh, so many things go wrong all the time. But thankfully, that very first time went very smoothly. And so I wasn't frustrated. And, I found this new way of working. And I still remember that first print really well. And I was so excited. I thought, wait, maybe there's something here. And I loved it was really hard at first because I didn't know how to work with color layers. I didn't know how to think that way. But I think it's again that thing of loving learning and loving trying new things where I immediately saw in this challenge that I had to conquer. And my brain really hurt from trying to think in terms of color layers, but I also found that incredibly invigorating.
Yeah.
And then, it just, I don't know, my work started to evolve very rapidly through printmaking. And that was so exciting for me. And then also specifically within the world of illustration and books, printmaking obviously is so much about the paper and the page as well. So that became a wonderful way for me to start approaching, design and thinking about where text would fit in and how I could use white space. And today, I mean, still negative space is such a huge part of my work. But at that time, it was in a very practical design sense. But yeah, printmaking really opened up that world to me. And then I also just fell in love with the process too. And I fell in love with, mixing my colors and then choosing color palettes and the beauty of paper. And there's just so many.
Yeah. It sounds like you caught the bug or had the gene, this is just very, very printmakery talk. Like once you start talking about the beauty of paper, you're done for. You're a lifer.
I'm a nerd for paper. I just love it. And also, I should also just put in there too, not to mention the beauty of the community you gain in printmaking. I think, other art forms can be so solitary. And I was always just alone in my room, painting or drawing. And then suddenly, I was around people all the time and I had people to go and have a coffee break with.
Yeah.
And it was wonderful. It made me so much happier. And I felt so much more fulfilled as well, just having, people to bounce ideas off of. That was really a wonderful thing I gained, I think, in becoming a printmaker.
No, but yeah, it's that element in printmaking, the way it becomes almost in part communal art making because of the community. And as you said, like that ability to bounce ideas off of people or to just turn to someone and say, why isn't this working? Or to have someone else ask you about their work. And that opens up a door in your own mind that you hadn't walked through yet. It's really quite magical. And I think part of the reason why people stay, as one of the themes on the show, is I came for the art, I stayed for the community, because it takes some of that, as you said, solitary art making.
Yes.
it takes some of the solitary aspects of art making away, and that it can be really lonely. You know, I write a lot, and writing is totally just in your own head, and it means sitting somewhere completely alone, focused for hours. And printmaking can also be that, but also I think that, as you said, the communal aspect. Yeah.
Also, when you're working all alone like that, I don't know about you, but I have these moments where I think, am I crazy? Is this stupid?
Yeah, totally.
And you really need fresh eyes sometimes. And as you were saying, sometimes also just to ask, why isn't this working?
Yeah.
Sometimes the solution is so simple. For me, an example immediately leaps to mind, which is very early on when I had, I had been screen printing for a few months, and I made this print of, well, maybe you've seen it because you mentioned foxes earlier, but I have dancing foxes. And so, I spent ages preparing the layers for them. And I didn't know how to use Photoshop at the time, so I couldn't test it until I actually printed, which now I realize is complete folly. So now, I scan my layers after I've painted them, and I make sure they're working before I commit to print.
Yeah.
Ages. But at the time I used to just print it, see how it was working, and if it wasn't working, I'd have to go back and change things, which I guess is a window into how people used to do it before technology.
Yeah, for sure.
But so I had made this print, and it just wasn't working for some reason. And the same print tech I was mentioning earlier, John, he took one look at it and he said, you know what, I think I had first of all, this was so painstaking, so it hurt to undo it, but it ended up being, just the simple fix. And now I still love that print a lot. And he just said, I had done all of these floorboards on the ground. And he said, I think if you took that out, this would work. And that was it. And I hadn't even thought of that. I just kept looking and thinking, I am so unhappy. I spent days preparing these layers. It's not working, and I don't know why. And he took one look at it and said, I think that's it. And it really was it.
Yeah. Yeah, and just having that fresh set of eyes, and I think particularly when you're trying something new, whether in this case it was sort of the media for you, but also if it's something new conceptually, that's that really scary going out on a tightrope feeling. Is this an insane idea? Am I going to plummet horribly and crash and burn? And having other people, even if they're standing kind of, I don't know, back on the other side of the canyon and being like, left, go left, Yes,
well, I think in a way they have more perspective than we do because we're so close to our work, we're so attached to it, and also so emotional about it. So sometimes you need someone who isn't invested in it to just casually suggest something.
So do you find that you think very differently when you think about making art sort of with the primary audience being children versus the primary audience being adults?
Yes and no. I always hope that what I make specifically for the children's audience is also compelling for adults. But on the other hand, yes. I mean, I think that I think especially in terms of legibility, I think that when I'm making things for children, although children are surprisingly sophisticated, I think, and they're imaginative too. But
they don't feel any, what do you call it, compulsion to be polite either about your work.
Oh my God, brutal. Children are so honest, it sometimes hurts a little. So there's that. And I also think, they're also not tied down to a lot of us, once we're past our teenage years or maybe even earlier, we start thinking that things have to look a certain way because that's the way we see them in reality. And I think children are not tied to that, which is really amazing and wonderful. And it's actually something I struggle with myself, where I constantly want to not be tied to those things, but I can't help it sometimes where I think, well, but no, that person's in the distance. They have to be smaller, all these little rules we've built up for how we are allowed to portray the world. But But yeah, I mean, I think that when I make work, again with the air quotes for fine art, or just, I'm mostly just thinking for myself at the moment. And I think it's because the MFA is such a wonderfully indulgent and selfish period, where you don't think about anyone else really, but your own internal world. I think it allows a lot more space for uncertainty and also not having to communicate clearly. And again, that might be my illustration background coming in, where when I make things for books, I'm always thinking, okay, but is this passing along a specific idea well? And also, does this serve the story and things like that? Whereas things for myself, I'm learning to become a lot more playful, which is wonderful. And that's something I always am in other artists. And, there are absolutely illustrators who are incredibly playful. Some of my very good friends who are illustrators are that way. And I was always really jealous that they could do that. But somehow illustration didn't bring that out in me. But being here in the MFA has. So that's been really liberating and exciting to get into that space. And also just to see my work start to evolve kind of beyond my control, which is partly terrifying too. But so exciting. And sometimes I feel like I'm along for the ride and I don't quite know what's happening. But, I'm so curious to see where it will lead me.
Yeah, I think that's a really exciting / terrifying part of any creative process. Like when the music starts to play you, or the writing starts to write itself, or your art starts to kind of use you to manifest itself. And it's something that even, the late greats of the Renaissance, like Michelangelo, would talk about of that, like the sculpture's already in the marble. I'm just taking it out, this kind of idea.
Liberate it. Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think when you look at people talking about like the intersections between spirituality and creating, that's often where you see it come over too, is this people talking about being a vessel for something larger than themselves. Yeah. And so I'm excited for you, Junli. You're entering the woo-woo.
Yes, give me all the woo-woo.
Yeah. Well,
I do think nothing is quite as trance-like as being in a creative state, where you just magically lose 5 hours or something. There's nothing else you do that is like that. At least for me, there's nothing else like that.
Yeah, I think it's what happens is we go into flow states, and different people can get them in different ways. Like, I've heard people get them snowboarding, or they've studied horses and horse riders, and that both the horse and the rider will go into a flow state at the same time, or even people like doing like yeah, it's really beautiful. Or the people will do it with dogs. So like we'll do it with domesticated animals. Like if you're going on a run or exercising with a dog, and if you're someone who gets that flow state through physical activity, you and the dog can kind of enter it at the same time when they hook electrodes up to your brain. It's amazing, and it's one of these magical things.
What do they look at that tells them you are in a flow state?
So it actually, your brainwaves change. It's almost like in meditation how brainwaves change. Yeah.
Okay.
There's a whole book about it.
Oh, please send me.
Yeah, I think it's either, so it might be called, this is like a very patriarchal sounding thing, but I think it might be called The Rise of Superman. Okay. But that might just be written by the same author who wrote it, because the guy wrote it about flow states in sports, and The Rise of Superman is about these extreme records that start getting broken in sports, but how it's related to being in flow states. And anyway, I will definitely send it to you because it's super fascinating.
It sounds so interesting
and kind of mystical, which of course I love. I think now would be a really good time to pivot and start talking about the content of your work, because we've sort of set up for how you got there and your process. But so I was first introduced to your work when I was the juror for the Delta National Small Print Exhibition. And I just saw these amazing bodies dancing in a field. And because I was a juror, it was a blind jury. So, all the names are taken away. So all you have is the artist statement, the image, and the, dimensions and medium and all that. Yeah. And I had never seen your work before, but I was just completely enchanted by it. And yeah. And then, a couple weeks later, I got an email from Kathy over at Print Austin and saying, hey, here's a list of people that you might want to talk with who are in our 5x5 show. And at that point, I'd made my selection and selected your work, and they, unveiled the name. So I recognized your name from that. And so it was really kind of unlike anything I'd ever seen before. And it was these like full figured bodies with these round bellies and these large breasts. And then for where the nipples would be are eyes, and where the belly button would be is the mouth. Yeah. And they're just frolicking in this pastel landscape. And I just instantly loved it. And it was these beautiful light layers in lithograph, just these like really kind of mystical, almost sort of see-through layers. Yeah. And I'd love it if maybe you could, because that was the first print that really I was ever introduced to. Mm-hmm. If I know that you do a lot, and I'd love to hear about the sculpture and animation as well, but can you just speak to that series of these mystical female forms in their utopia of pastel?
Absolutely. I mean, I think you've also cottoned on to some of my most important formal qualities, which is largely, the translucency. I'm obsessed with the overlays of color. Yeah. But let me get into the content. So, it's just, this has been a body of work that I've been working on since the spring. And I honestly, I don't know, it might end up being fuel for years. I'm not sure right now, but yes, it's all inspired by this ancient Chinese cosmography, which is called the Shanhai Jing. In English, that's roughly like guideways to the mountains and seas, sometimes also called the classic of the mountains and seas. So it's this incredible. And so I kind of discovered it by accident because I really love mythology. And I always have since I was little. And then last year I was doing a lot of research on Chinese history and traditions. And then, one day I thought, maybe let me look into Chinese mythology. And so I came across this book. So it's very old. It dates back to around 400 BC. And so it kind of laid out this worldview of the Chinese at the time of the lands and the flora, the fauna, the deities, the peoples living in the world around them. So I found it really interesting, this idea of trying to map out how you see the world. And so, at the time I was having my moment of crisis, and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to say and what I wanted to do here. And so I thought, because I was confused, I could start building my own world and trying to work through all of that confusion through my artwork. And so within this book, I found this one figure called Xingtian. And so Xingtian was this deity, and he fought in a battle against the supreme god, who then cut off his head, and he was buried at the base of a mountain. But instead of dying, he metamorphosed. So his nipples became eyes, and his navel became a mouth, as you were just describing with my figures. So I reimagined him as as female, and also in the multiple, as, really the symbol of feminist resistance. And so I named this new character Ni Xingtian. And so she's really become my primary protagonist throughout all of my work. And now she's become this whole civilization. And so what I found so compelling about this original origin story, because I felt it really embodied this idea that, it's not just upheaval or submission. It's not that simple binary reaction that we have to oppression. And so I found it very validating that the way I experience my place in the world as a woman of color, it makes things more complicated and messier, and it gives this space for some nuance, right, and contradiction. I think we live in an age where it's such extreme identity politics, and people just want to check like one or two boxes and say that's all I am. But I've always felt that, you know, I have so many different facets of my life and so many different influences. So even though sometimes it's useful to say, okay, I'm, you know, Chinese American, I'm female, you know, I'm also interested in how those things intersect. And also, you know, all of the other things lived in my life, you know, having lived abroad, having a European stepdad, you know, those have all shaped me. So I'm very interested in this idea that we grow in, you know, different ways that are a bit unexpected, and that it's not always so easy to just reduce someone to these check boxes. So I don't know. I guess in a way, I wouldn't go as far as saying she's my alter ego, but she carries my spirit in my work, you know? Yeah. And so since I came up with her, and that was, I don't know, maybe around February, it's just grown since then. And this world has continued growing. And yeah, I've just been having a lot of fun creating my own mythologies within it and my own myths.
Yeah. And I think that ability to kind of dive into that messiness of the identity politics that, as you say, are so hotbed right now, and you know, for good reason, and the fact that, you know, we're trying to discover, I think particularly in the United States, what it is to be American. And I think about this in the context is, you know, you've lived abroad, and you know, for instance, Italy, there's such a clear definition of what it is to be Italian. You know, it's like we were these warring states, and there was Rome, and then there were plagues, and then there was Marcus Aurelius, and like now we love coffee, and like, of course, I don't mean to be oversimplistic, because I'm sure, you know, I know that Italy has its extreme complexities and, you know, really diverse cultures within the different states. But I think particularly in the US, we're more likely to see differences among each other than sameness, in the way that other countries with maybe a longer non-colonial history might have a deeper sense of that. And so I do feel that like the identity politics and exploring that and like diving into that is messy work.
Yes.
But so important, because I think we're all struggling with these questions now of what are we collectively when we seem so divided, and we're more likely to see differences than sameness, you know, in Thailand, you know, which has extreme politics and extreme division in politics between, you know, royalists and non-royalists. There's still the like, but we're Thai, you know, like that lives in there in a way that like, I feel like we don't really feel in the States.
Yes. I mean, I think America is, and it's both good and bad, right? That we are this nation of immigrants, and unless you are indigenous, you came from somewhere else, and so it's normal that we have this crazy mix of cultures. And I think we're learning how to live together and how to be together, and still have compassion for each other, and still respect each other. And so I think that's the incredibly hard thing. And also that there is a significant portion of the population who thinks that there's only one way to be American. I think that's the real problem.
And that is really when things get just bad. Like, I tend to be someone who tries to really see all sides of things and not make, you know, very strict, like overly simplistic statements. But I'm like, no, that's just bad. Like, if you think that you have it. So for sure. And so you also said at the top of the hour that you're working in animation and sculpture as well, and
trying.
And so, you know, you're saying that are you still working with your alter ego? Is she coming with you into these new media?
She is. She is, absolutely. So one of the first things I made earlier in this year was her. So I started out with sorry, I'm talking about ceramics right now.
Yeah.
Yes. So, and they're all, I think the prints are always the birthplace of my ideas. But So I had started making her my prints, and then I decided to try making her in ceramics. So yeah, my first attempt at that was in porcelain with celadon glaze, because last year I was really, trying to dig into all these traditional Chinese ways of making. And so now I've moved a bit away from that, just because, as we were just talking about, I don't want to limit myself to just being just the Chinese part of my Chinese American self. Yeah, so yes, so I've made a few. Another recurring character in my prints is the flying boob. You might not have seen that one. I have this flying boob, which my Nixingtian rides sometimes. So
I have not had the pleasure, but I really look forward to being introduced to the flying boob.
So my latest way of making ceramics, which has been quite exciting. It's been since the fall. Exciting for me because I think it's finally starting to carry the same visual language as my prints. So that's something I've been trying to resolve since I started working in ceramics here. Now they're, I shouldn't even bother trying to describe them. Anyway, so yeah, I started with my flying boob. And so I made like a mini flock. So there's 3 of them. And then right before my finals, was that last month? It feels so long ago. But yeah, I also made 2 of my protagonists, the Nixingtian. They are a bit more, like I don't draw eyes and things like that, but they're covered with patterns. And the patterns are certain motifs that are recurring in my prints or in the myths I'm creating. So one of them is, although, now I realize no one else but me sees them. I need to work on communicating that a bit better. But, also the ceramics are evolving constantly. But yeah, so the 2 that I made are dancing ones. So you'll probably, feel echoes of my print that you saw. And they're covered in these patterns. And I'm also trying to figure out how to get those overlays of color on my ceramics with underglazes and glazes. So that's very exciting for me. And I do just love working with clay. I find it's fun. It's just so fun. And there's this wonderful Chinese creation myth of how humans are made. And so the creation myth is that Nuwa is like the mother goddess, I guess. So it's quite interesting because Chinese society is very patriarchal. A lot of historians think that ancient Chinese society was actually matriarchal. And so one of the traces you can see in that is this origin story where Nuwa actually created humanity. And she did it by, she was at the river, I think it was, and she's reflection and she felt lonely. And so she decided to make herself companions. And so I'm getting into this story because she actually makes them out of mud.
Yeah.
She starts forming all these little people out of clay, essentially. So I kind of see some echoes of that in my desire to start making my own little figurines out of clay. Although obviously I am not a mother goddess. But,
Oh, don't sell yourself short.
I am. The origin point.
Yeah.
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 And then with animation, that's much newer. And I'm not totally sure where it's going, but I think, again, it's with the storytelling. It just seems natural to want to be able to work with something that goes, starts working over time. I was actually very inspired by, I love William Kentridge's animations. I think they're so amazing. So although I'm not doing, he just wipes it away because it's fine charcoal and takes photos. But it made me realize that, animation doesn't have to be super slick. I don't need tons of knowledge in how to work in Photoshop and Illustrate and all those things. Because again, remember, daunted by technical blush. But still, I started thinking, okay, what if I can just do some line drawings, but, by hand, and then, fill in those shapes and have those become negative shapes and then have those start to move across, layers of color. That felt manageable. Of course, it ended up being so much more complicated than I thought it would. So I had to learn a new program. So I'm still kind of coming to grips with that. But or at least I hope it's going to be an exciting and new way of working for me.
Yeah, and this is such a wonderful time to be able to explore it,
Yeah.
in grad
Resources.
school.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, because I have people I can actually ask questions to. So, story of my life, I had a demo of the program. I was like, okay, let me just try this. And yeah, I've just gotten a new iPad for Christmas, so
Oh, awesome.
my pencil is coming soon. So I hope it will streamline a bit of the process because it's just been very slow because I draw it and then I scan it and I clean it up and then I have to vectorize it. It's really been a pain, and doing that for just tons and tons of drawings is quite hard. But yeah, so I start with my lithographic layers, at least in the one animation I've done so far. And I also did another tester. And so yeah, I scan each separate color layer and then I kind of made an animation based on that print. So I'm also happy to say that I've updated my website since the last time.
Good.
So you can actually see my current work now on my website. So yeah, I've uploaded that one animation there. So it's based on one of my prints, which you can see in the print section of my website. But yeah, and just playing around with that a bit. But I think, I might start. I'm not sure. I would like to encourage myself to also be quite experimental and make some things that aren't clear sequences. But then I also want to illustrate and to make animations of some of these, little myths I have in my brain as well, or even just little sections of them to start planting those seeds of, in viewers' minds of, well, okay, where are these things coming from? And, who is this creature and where does she come from? And yeah, all of those little things. I think there's a lot of power in seeing something unfold before our eyes. And so I've always found animation very compelling. And yeah, I think it's going to be a good resource for me too.
Yeah, and I would imagine that if, from what it sounds like, your animated figures aren't speaking, and so would you say that maybe kind of some of that training in nonverbal storytelling, is it coming back, do you think, when you make the animations?
Oh gosh, I hope so. Yeah, I would love to dive into that and thinking more about that. Yeah, I mean, I think not in the one I've made so far because I kept it very simple as a test, but I think thinking about pacing, thinking about scale, all these things are so essential in telling stories through pictures. So yeah, I think even if I'm not consciously thinking about it, it will definitely play a huge role. And yeah, it's useful. It's useful to have that.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, because it's your winding road. You always pick up things along the way.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I remember you saying in our previous conversation, nothing is wasted.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that was our theme. Yeah, nothing is wasted. That it's just everything you do. It's just more information, and I think that as you had pointed out earlier about our obsession with youth, and we're kind of given this narrative of especially I think as people who are socialized female, you're peaking at 19. And then it's just downhill from there, and you just have to scrape and try and hold on to some semblance of youth so you have any value at all. And which I really hate, obviously. I think that's a very, very toxic mentality. But I really love much more this idea that we're on this journey and we're picking up what's useful to us along the way. Right. And it's each step is leading us to the next one. And so you can show up at your next chapter with the tools that you need.
Yes, I love that perspective. And then there's this idea that you're more, there are things you couldn't have done when you were younger and you're more prepared now, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And at least personally for me, the pandemic has been a time of great reflection. And I don't think I'm unusual in that.
Oh.
And, kind of really having to slow down and see what's there when it gets quiet. And when you don't have such a distinctive forward momentum that you can hold on to as a sense of identity, what's left. And I came to the conclusion that, really up until about like a year ago, I was kind of an asshole,
I'm sure that's not true. You're obviously lovely.
But like, and then like, and just the ways in which like I still can be, and there's like these internal narratives, and that you just have to kind of fight against it. But anyway, yeah, it's just kind of funny that way that I'm so much more useful, I feel like, as a human being now to myself and to others at 37, because I went to a bunch of different schools and didn't know what I was doing, and because I've had plans shatter in front of me and have to pick up the pieces and figure out what I'm going to do next, and because I've gone through death and loss and fear, like
but you're still here.
I'm still here, and that nothing is wasted. And I love hearing your winding road story, because you're making this incredible work, and it sounds like it's really lighting you up, and it's giving you joy, and it feels like it's where you're supposed to be, and you have all these different tools along the way. That you had to pick up so you could do it, so you could be here.
I think that if I had gone straight into a BFA when I was younger, I don't know if I would be an artist today, because I don't think I knew who I was. I don't think I knew what I wanted to do with my work. And I think so much of being an artist is, having a strong sense of who you are as a human being, and then wanting to share that perspective with the world. And I just have that at the time. And, some people are fortunate to have that quite young, but I didn't. I think I really had to live my life and, go down these different paths before I realized what was really important to me and what I value and what I care about, what's important to me as well.
Yeah, I really identify with that. And I remember even being young, being a freshman in college and being aware that other people had some things figured out already that I didn't.
Yes, me too. Everyone know.
Exactly. I just felt like such an alien, and I had to go learn just by falling down a whole bunch, and finally, really stumbling forward, trial and error, to figure out what I wanted. And not everyone has to do that. And I don't know, I really think that that's where you can see that metaphor, or even not a metaphor for some people, of talking about old souls and new souls. And that I was just so new that I was just like a little alien baby that had to figure out things.
Oh, well.
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, it doesn't matter how long it takes, right? The important thing is you get there. And I think many people spend their whole lives not knowing those things.
Yeah, or not even asking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's so sad. I mean, no disrespect to you. Happy just going along with the flow, but I don't know. I find it so exciting when your life has a purpose and that you're moving through your world, with goals and with dreams and with visions. And I don't know. I feel lucky to have that, I guess.
The seeker gene can be disruptive, and it can make you live in a bunch of different countries and, not have a savings account, but but you get incredible experiences from it, I think. Yeah.
I think that's so important. This is so cliche, but you only have one life, right?
Yeah.
You have to make the most of it, and you have to live it. Yeah.
I was talking to one of my oldest and dearest friends a couple of days ago about this idea, because he's also someone who's like, I'm going to have a sailboat around the world. No, I'm going to drive a motorcycle from Alaska to Argentina. No, I'm going to, like this kind of a person.
Yeah.
And I was talking to him and I was like, David, some people aren't like that. And he was like, I don't believe it. Like, he couldn't conceive. He couldn't conceive of a life where you're not seeking, where you're not like, what's next? What's my next thing? And I was like, no. I've met them. Some people are happy to just go to work, come home, watch 2.5 Men, and go to sleep. Like, they live. I've met with them, And again,
yes, me too. I've met them too. And, like, some of them are friends of mine.
Absolutely. Again, no shade, like, because they seem very content, and I would never want to shame anyone for their contentment. But yeah.
I mean, sometimes I'm jealous because I think the highs we get are equally matched by the lows.
Yes.
When you seek out all of those things.
Yeah.
You have such big dreams, but then you're also so disappointed sometimes. And also you're very dissatisfied, I think, when life is just, going day by day and normal, and I don't know.
Yeah, that's so...
What's going to happen next? And I don't even mean, in the sense of your friend David or of like traveling around the world, but, even just in the studio, I get very discontent when something new isn't happening or something isn't exciting me. Like, why? My life is horrible.
Yeah. That's so funny. So Tim and I just yesterday got our dogs from Bangkok that we've been tooth and nail fighting to get because it's been incredibly complex. It's been thousands and thousands of dollars and CDC regulations and like crazy layovers in Dubai and like this. Tim had to drive to LAX and then drive them back. And it has been our thing for months. Get these dogs. They arrived last night. And this morning I was looking at them and I turned to Tim and I was like, so what's next? Like, so we got the dogs now. I need the next thing. Like, I got 6 hours of contentment and now like I need my next like fire,
I was just lamenting this with a friend, I think last week. Why doesn't my happiness stay longer? Something good happens. And I'm really excited for a few hours and then it just wears off. It's so annoying.
I need the next thing.
I want to be happier longer.
Yeah. It's so funny. Well, I guess on that note, do you have anything on the future and on the horizon that you want people to watch out for? I mean, there's the 5x5, which Print Austin, which is what brought us here together today. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, the Delta National Small Print Exhibition as well, which is at the Bradbury Art Museum.
Yes.
Besides those two that I know of, is there anything else you want to plug or that people can follow you and look for?
Not right now, but if you follow me on Instagram, I will definitely be sharing anything. It's been interesting because, you mentioned earlier you'd never see my work. Because I just started submitting to things this fall. I plan to continue submitting to things that look interesting to me. I haven't realized how horribly expensive framing is, though. So
yes. I'm sorry that's the bad news now that you're a printmaker.
Oh, it really hurts. But yeah, there's nothing concrete right now, I don't think.
Okay, I think being into exhibitions in 2022 already, here on New Year's Eve of 2021, I think that's plenty. So, would you like to let people know your Instagram handle so they can find you?
Yes. So my Instagram is arts with an S. Make sure there's an S. I get art of song all the time, but it's arts with an S of song. So SONG, which is my last name, but I also like that it's a song. And my website is the same. So www.artsofsong.com.
Beautiful.
And it's finally updated. So
see, that's why the recording had to just disappear, is so you could have a couple of extra days to update the website. It's all coming together.
Oh, it felt so good to do that. It was a big check on my to-do list.
Wonderful. Well, it has been completely a delight again to speak with you. And I really look forward to sharing this conversation in just a couple hours. And hopefully our paths will cross again. I'm sure they will. And maybe we'll see you in person at Print Austin. All things, finances and variants and plane cancellations and life, if it all falls into place, it would be great to connect in person there.
Oh, I would love that.
Okay. All right, Junli, have a wonderful new year, and I will talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye. If you liked today's episode, we do have a Patreon. where you can help us keep the lights on here and get bonus content, like Shop Talk Shorts with our editor Timothy Pauschak, who digs deep on materials, processes, and techniques with our guests. And that's our show for this week. Join me again next week when my guest will be Anna Trojanowska, Polish lithographer extraordinaire. We'll talk about her love of lithography and getting lost in the process, litho on marble, running her own studio, and having a heart of stone. You won't want to miss it. This episode, like all episodes, was written and produced by me, Miranda Metcalf, with editing by Timothy Pauschak and music by Joshua Weber. I'll see you next week.